Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Everyday relationships profoundly impact the quality of our lives. What can we do to nurture our connections with those we love? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Money is a frequent cause of friction in marriages. What can couples do to address the baggage each one brings from the families they grew up in, especially when it comes to finances?
Kindness and generosity are critical to a loving and supportive relationship. How do you put these concepts into practice in your daily life? This can be especially challenging when a coworker or a family member rejects your good intentions.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn how to improve interactions at home as well as at work.
First, the news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, one of the most popular blood pressure pills in the world has been linked to skin cancer. More than 20 million Americans take hydrochlorothiazide, or HCTZ, every day. It's found in dozens of combination blood pressure pills and has been perceived as an extremely safe choice for controlling hypertension. A new study from Denmark suggests that this thiazide diuretic is associated with squamous cell carcinoma. This type of skin cancer is linked to excessive sun exposure. HCTZ sensitizes the skin to ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The study included 80,000 Danish citizens with non-melanoma skin cancer, those who took the highest dose of hydrochlorothiazide for the most years were 7 times more likely to develop squamous cell carcinoma than people who took no HCTZ. The scientists looked at other blood pressure medications and did not find any similar associations.
High blood pressure is acknowledged as the silent killer. That's not disputed. But new research from the UK suggests that doctors should pay attention if their older patients' blood pressure begins to go down unexpectedly. The scientists analyzed records from more than 46,000 Britons who died between 2010 and 2014. All were at least 60 years old. The analysis shows that people had declining blood pressures for more than a decade before death. The drop in systolic blood pressure was more than 10 millimeters of mercury for the majority of the individuals. This drop was not due to treatment for hypertension, but it was steeper for those with high blood pressure, atrial fibrillation, heart failure, or stroke. The scientists admit that they need more research to fully understand the cause of declining blood pressure. They suggest, however, that these findings may require doctors to pay attention when an older patient has a substantial drop in blood pressure.
Did you get your flu shot this year? Will it work to keep you from getting influenza? We won't be able to answer that question for several months. That's because it takes the CDC a long time to collect the data on vaccine effectiveness. Even when there's a good match between the shot and the circulating strains of influenza, the vaccine is only about 40% effective on average. This year, though, it may not be even that good. A perspective published in the New England Journal of Medicine reports that the past flu season in Australia resulted in more hospitalizations and death than normal. The Southern Hemisphere is usually 6 months ahead in their flu season, so Australia has just finished its flu season. A preliminary analysis of vaccine effectiveness using Australian data estimates that it's about 10% against H3N2. That's the predominant strain of type A flu this year. The authors point out that matching the vaccine to the ever-changing influenza strains each year is challenging. They call for the development of a universal flu vaccine that would transform protection against influenza.
Choose your snacks wisely, and you may lower your cholesterol. That's the take-home from a small but careful study done at Penn State University. In this trial, 31 overweight or obese individuals followed a typical American diet for a month while their cholesterol levels were monitored. During another month, they included about 1/3 cup of almonds in their diet every day. During a different 4-week time frame, they ate about 1/4 cup of dark chocolate and 2.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder daily. There was a month in which they got both almonds and chocolate in their daily rations. The diets were adjusted so that they contained the same calories, and no one gained or lost weight during the trial. There were 2-week breaks between each session. The results are intriguing. Almonds lowered LDL cholesterol by about 7%. While cocoa and chocolate did not lower LDL, they did not raise it either. The combination of almonds and cocoa resulted in fewer, small, dense LDL particles that are dangerous for heart health. The lead researcher points out that we each have a few hundred discretionary calories for our diets. Choosing almonds and dark chocolate instead of cookies and candy might make a difference to our hearts. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about relationships. How kind are we to those we're closest to? Do we forgive minor transgressions, or do they become stumbling blocks to intimacy?
How do you react to family members who constantly criticize you or each other? What about coworkers who are quick to find fault but slow to offer praise? Old patterns are hard to shake, but is it possible to improve the way you interact with other people?
To help us learn how good relationships work and how we can emulate them in our own lives, we're talking with Dr. Don Azevedo. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Don Azevedo.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Azevedo, we were fascinated to see an article in The Atlantic titled Masters of Love. It's all about relationships, and the essence of it is that there's science saying that lasting relationships come down to kindness and generosity. Boy, that sounds simple, but we all know simple isn't always easy. So, is it really that simple?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it really is. So the science behind this has to do with physiological arousal. And when we are around people who are kind and generous and non-threatening, our arousal level drops. When we're around people who may be kind or may be volatile, our arousal level goes up because we're watching for danger. And we are still animals at our core. And danger really triggers this response of I need to run away, I need to attack, or I need to freeze. So couples who master this are generous and calm, and their physiology actually relaxes in the presence of one another.
You know, that reminds me of a medical conference I attended, Terry. It was in Wisconsin, Stevens Point. It was what, 30?
It was 1982. 40? Okay. I know because our daughter was 2 years old at the time.
And this really brilliant physician was talking about how you should live your life to reduce stress. And he said, buy a mood ring.
Now, mood rings were already kind of out of fashion by 1982, but you could still more or less find them a little bit.
And he said, yeah, but, you don't really need a mood ring, but it's going to be helpful. He said, because you want to be around people who make your hands warm. And you can tell that by looking at the mood ring because it changes color when your hands are cold and when they're warm. You can just but you can just feel them. Mm-hmm. And when you're around somebody who makes your hands cold, you know that you're under stress. And when your hands are warm, it means that that person is making you feel good. So that kind of brings me to this research that's mentioned in the Atlantic article about how they tested a relationship in newlyweds. Mm-hmm. So what did they do and what did they find?
So you're referencing Gottman's
Exactly.
Love Lab. So what they found, number one, is that Gottman loves to have rhyming words. So there were the masters of relationships and the disasters. And what he was noticing in there is that high physiological arousal led to a predictive capacity for the relationship will dissolve. It will not be able to last. And where physiological arousal was low, right, and people were relaxed and confident in one another's presence, those relationships lasted. He looked further to see, well, what were the behaviors that happened between people? And what he talked about there was the bid for attention, where someone says, hey, look, or listen to me, or anything that asks you to tend to them. And when the other person turned toward them, even for just a moment, to address whatever the issue was, even if it was no more than a smile in response. Yep, that's a cute thing, right? Those couples had a higher likelihood of being masters because there was the sense of, I'm important enough that you would turn toward me. And this goes back to what we talked about in the last interview. When you feel chosen by your partner every single day by those little tiny acts, you feel confident and relaxed and attached. When you're not sure if the person will turn towards you, you're uncertain of that attachment, and that leads to a pretty constant state of anxiety, not conducive to love.
Well, they use the example of, hey, look at that pretty bird flying past. Mm-hmm. And if the partner ignores that request, this is not a good sign. If the partner says, oh, yeah, that's a pretty bird, that's cool, thanks for bringing that to my attention, masters. Whereas if you're, don't bother me, I'm reading the newspaper, or don't bother me, I'm watching the football game, not a good sign.
Not a good sign, right? So examples of turning towards and turning away. And it doesn't even have to be as many words as you said. So look at the pretty bird, and the person actually behaviorally looks, so joins you in the activity, and then smiles. That's enough. That's a turning toward.
Well, the research is fascinating because it shows that the couples that ended up staying together actually responded to each other's bids about 80% or maybe even more, 8 out of 10 times. Whereas for couples that didn't do well later, they only responded to each other maybe 3 times out of 10. So there was quite a difference in terms of the way they were behaving as newlyweds and then the outcome. And we're not talking about listening to somebody go on for 15 minutes, which is a real investment of time and energy. We're just talking about turning towards somebody and acknowledging that they're saying something that should be listened to.
Yes, that's exactly right. And these are really tiny things. Like, hey, look at the dog. The dog's, on his back. And going, oh, yeah, that's cute. Or anything like that. Those are bids for attention. All I'm asking for is, do I matter more than whatever it is that you're doing? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, if you want a happy marriage, make sure the other person matters more than anything else you're doing. Unless, of course, you're like doing something dangerous.
Right.
Now, a lot of people think that if they just give their partner roses on the anniversary and acknowledge the birthday, everything's cool, I've done my job, I'm being kind, I'm being generous, why do you need more from me?
Cool. Do those people only eat on the anniversary and on the birthday?
On Christmas.
If they can make it without food for that long, beautiful. Then maybe they're okay.
Not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Kindness is like the food of marriage. So these small, kind acts, multiple times a day, keep you healthy and vigorous in the relationship.
We've been talking about kindness, but generosity also fits into it. And I guess generosity is the piece of saying, okay, I can turn my attention to you away from what I was paying attention to long enough to see what you're doing or what you're up to or what has caught your attention. And that's kind of a generosity because I'm not clinging to my own thing.
Yes, I would call that more a kindness. Mm-hmm. The generosity comes from wanting to see your point of view about this. Uh-huh. So what is it that's interesting to you? It may not be interesting to me, But what is it that's interesting to you? That's the act of generosity. I can set aside my point of view, my righteous, I know everything there is to be known, and really experience the world through your lens.
Thank you for explaining that. I was struggling with the idea of how does generosity fit into this?
This idea of walking in the other person's shoes, it doesn't come easy. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to some people, to perhaps most people. How can we better do that? Because that'll serve us well in our relationships, at work, in all of our interactions.
So that's a great question. Do we have about 6 hours? Because it's very complex, and it really starts with acknowledging and honoring the self. The more confident you are that I'm okay in the world, I don't have to know all the answers. The answers I know, I can use to do the things I need to do in the world. Therefore, it is not threatening to hear another person's point of view. That's the key. If you don't feel confident in yourself, anyone else's point of view that differs from yours is a threat. We are seeing that a lot, with the current election and all this stuff. People are panicking and they're catastrophizing about things because they're terrified to consider that there might be another point of view that could work. And then they just run back to their own point of view. So that's the way you do it in the shortest way, but that's really complex. Because most of us grow up feeling ashamed, feeling guilty, feeling not good enough. We get messages from the media that our body is not the right shape, that our ideas are not correct, that our relationships aren't good, that we didn't score high enough, that we didn't go to the right college, that we didn't go to college at all, that our profession is somehow less than other people's profession, or I don't earn enough. And those are only the messages that come right to mind. There are so many more that undermine the sense of well-being that you need in order to be able to take on another person's point of view.
You're listening to clinical psychologist Don Azevedo. He's founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina.
Terry, I think an awful lot of people feel insecure. Not enough money, not thin enough, not athletic enough, just not good enough. And when you're insecure in your own skin, it's much easier to criticize other people.
Well, I think it makes it very threatening to acknowledge those other views, as Dr. Azevedo was saying. And we certainly have seen a great deal of that in the public discourse lately. But it plays out in private relationships as well.
Absolutely. It works at work badly in many cases, and it also interferes with our relationships. Well, we need to take a short break. But when we come back, we'll learn how couples can learn to appreciate kindness and generosity.
How could a counselor model empathy?
What can couples do about family baggage that each of them brings to a particular relationship?
Issues like money frequently cause trouble, especially if there was friction about it between your parents.
Oh boy, I can relate to that one. That was something that was very common in our household. We'll also consider how we can practice kindness both at home as well as at work.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1103. That number again, 800-732-2334, or visit our website, peoplespharmacy.com. You can also download the podcast from iTunes.
Today, our topic is relationships. We're discussing how two simple concepts, kindness and generosity, can transform our interactions with those closest to us. Our guide on these matters is clinical psychologist Don Azevedo. He's founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina.
Don, you see couples all the time. In all kinds of states, some doing pretty well, some on the verge of divorce, some feeling tremendous angst, going through all of that fight or flight emotion when they interact with each other. How do you help them begin to appreciate how valuable kindness and generosity are to that relationship and be able to begin to sense what's going on for the other person, not just what they're experiencing?
So this comes from modeling and empathy. So if I was going to reduce it down to two words, those would be the words. I am modeling to each of them kindness, generosity, the idea that their point of view is valid when it is valid. So I only validate the valid. But when I do this, I model what I'm looking for them to do with one another. And often when they've experienced empathy about their point of view, they're comfortable enough. Now they're grounded in their sense of, I'm okay. My point of view is okay. It was accepted by Dr. Azevedo, so I'm okay. They're more willing to turn towards and listen to their partner. And at first in the therapy office, it's coming through me. I'm the hub of the communication. So they'll share a point of view to me. The other person will share a point of view to me. Both will witness me providing empathy and recognizing the appropriateness of the point of view, and then starting to help them unpack what are the points that are common between these two points of view, and where are really the differences. And often when that happens, they recognize the differences aren't that great. I am not in as much danger as I thought I was. And perhaps there's a solution that we can both agree on.
Can you tell a story that would give us an example of that?
So one of the issues that comes up for couples frequently is how to manage finances. Where do we spend our money, or how do we save our money? What happens? And a couple came into my office and they were struggling with this financial issue. In this particular case, the woman was very risk averse, and she wanted to save the money, pay down the debts, to the extent that there wouldn't be anything available for fun things along the way. A trip here, a trip there. And they came in because of a precipitating event where the husband had an event to go to with his college buddies that is a unique one-time event. It's not like we can put this off for 2 years until we pay this down and then do the event. He either was going to be there or not, and he would miss it forever. This became a point of contention between the two of them. You're not respecting me, I'm not being respected, everybody feeling more and more righteous in their point of view. He went off and did what he thought was the right thing, which was go to the event. And when he came back, it was ice in the house. Right? When they came in, what I demonstrated was, you actually have a good point of view in the sense that paying down all the bills and buying lead time for any disaster that might happen for your family, like the recession in 2008, which is part of what shaped all of this, that makes sense. And, husband, you have a point of view, too, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and it wasn't that expensive. And it meant a lot to you. It was very important. Each of you had reasonable things to do. How will you solve this problem going into the future? Because you can't solve the one in the past. Right? What happened is, with empathy, each was able to see how they hurt the other and to apologize for that. I didn't want to hurt you. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you. This was really important to me, and I felt like I would miss an opportunity. That, often called rapprochement, that I'm coming back to one another, was a huge healing piece. And then they were able to think about, so how do we balance the need to save because of a fear of the world falling out from under us with the need to live and to experience the moment as we go and to enjoy life? And that was a great conversation.
You know, Don, I suspect that a lot of couples get into trouble over financial issues. And just to share my own personal experience, growing up, my parents were just poor as church mice. I mean, there was just no money. And one of my mother's, I won't call it her favorite expressions, it was a painful expression, she had to rob Peter to pay Paul. Mm-hmm. And it was always this constant thing of, you know, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to be able to balance the checkbook? And if she couldn't do that, my dad would get very upset and very angry. And I would hear them fighting over money a lot of the time because there just wasn't enough of it. So growing up, there was this experience that money was always like a big lightning rod deal. And it has always scared me, you know, this sense of, you know, preparing for a rainy day. You never know what's around the corner. How are you going to be able to pay your bills? I suspect that a lot of us carry baggage from our families of origin, from our parents. How do we begin to expunge those feelings? Because they can affect our relationships.
That's an excellent question, and you are absolutely right. We are the accumulation of all of the experiences we've had in our life. And the ones that are most primal for us are the ones that happened when we were very young. So if you experienced that kind of thing, you would be worried about money. Even if you were making 50 times what your parents were making and actually had plenty of cushion. You saw this from the Depression generation. Those people often earned quite a bit of money and still acted as if they couldn't buy bread. And finances are one of the topics I do with premarital couples. When they come in and say, hey, we really want to launch on a good deal, finances is the number 2 issue that I talk about because it's the one that is most contentious and around which Americans have built a great deal of shame, right? We're not supposed to share how much we earn. We're not supposed to share how much our house is worth or our cars or any of that kind of stuff because that's somehow gross, right? We can talk about violence, but we can't talk about finances. So couples often need to talk about what is true. So how do you get out of the past? First, you recognize what's here in the present. What was true for me as a 5-year-old may not be true for me as a 55-year-old. So how do I come into the present? When I was young, I mean, my family were immigrants. They didn't have a lot of money either, although they made really good use of the money they did have. I have to say that. They did that well. I, of course, got way far away from that. I could act like they did back then and not go on vacations and not do any of those extra things. Or I could recognize I can give my family something more than what I had because I'm not tied to the past. That's really the key. So how do you do that in real time? The first thing is you have to be mindful of your emotions. When the emotion comes up, so spouse comes to me and says, I want to do this. And I notice my anxiety level goes up or my shoulders get tight because I'm ready to battle because this is not my area. I have to notice that emotion and breathe into it and say, all right, I need to calm down. This is not an attack. This is not threatening. This is a request, a bid for attention. Let me turn my attention to this and examine what the problem is, right? So spouse says, I want to go on a world tour on the QE2 on the best cabin they have.
So your reaction is fight or flight.
My reaction very well might be fight or flight. Or I can be generous, and here's the opportunity for generosity. Wow, that would be an incredible trip. I'm curious, what brought that trip to your mind? Right? What's actually going on? What is your point of view? So that's the generous part where I can calm my emotions and just find out. Because even if she tells me, here's the 52 reasons why that would be the best trip for all of us to go on, for all of this, I still don't have to say yes. I can still say, all right, I understand that, and that's awesome, and here's what's true for me. And that is where you get true health in a relationship, where you can hear the other person's point of view and say what's true for you, even with the past. So yes, we have the money in the bank to do this, and I'm worried about spending that much on this kind of thing for these reasons, right? So the past can still influence us. I could have, I don't know, how much do you think that would cost?
I can't even imagine.
Let's say
beyond imagination. Yeah,
let's say $100,000, because that's like a ridiculous amount of money.
Takes my breath away.
Seriously. What else could we do with $100,000? We could buy a house. We could, lots of things. But I can recognize this is where this is coming from. And in reality, I got $100,000 sitting in the bank, if indeed I do. Right? How do I come to the reality of what's happening right now? And that's the way you get out of the past.
I'm still a little confused. So, one person says, I really want to take this trip. This is the most important thing in my life. It's on my bucket list. And if I don't do this, I will regret it for the rest of my life. And the other person is going, yeah, but we could send our kid to college. We could do all these, educational things. We could do philanthropy. Taking a trip, that's frivolous.
All right, so there's where you cross the line. Mm-hmm. So listing the things that were important to you, you were in great shape. As soon as you went to judgment, that is frivolous. You now have launched a war. Mm-hmm. Because the only response the other person has is to defend their position, right? If you stop before the frivolous, they can say, all of those things are really great, and this is on my bucket list. How could we do both of those things? Or here's how I figured out how we can do both of those things.
So avoiding that frivolous remark.
Or basically a judgmental remark that says, I'm not valuing what you have brought forward.
That's right.
So that's the key.
That is the key.
Generosity and kindness.
Generosity, kindness, confidence in self, that you can hear another point of view and not have to change your own. Those are the keys to lifelong happiness.
Now, we've been talking about kindness and generosity, and they are simple, but they're not that easy. How can people maintain kindness and generosity day after day, during the whole day or a good part of it? Doesn't it get hard? Some people find it hard.
Yes.
How can you help people really keep this up?
Practice.
Oh, what an idea.
So it's a muscle like any other muscle. So if you practice it with intentionality, you don't have to do it 100% of the time, 24 or even 8 hours in the day. You don't have to do it every minute. But if you practice noticing when you're in interaction with somebody and just stopping and saying, how can I be kind? When you practice, you're walking in the grocery aisle, right? What does it cost you to make eye contact and smile at someone? Brief eye contact. Don't stare at them. That's a little creepy. But just smile as you're walking by and doing your business. That's an act of kindness. An act of generosity is stopping and helping somebody get something down from a shelf they can't quite reach, or answering a question that they have. There are thousands of opportunities to practice and rehearse kindness and generosity in your general life, and then bring it home to your children, to your spouse, maybe to your brothers and sisters and parents.
And to your colleagues at work.
Yes, to them too.
It reminds me of that terrible old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. It sounds like this is a muscle that really does need to be nurtured. And I'm wondering how we can learn to do that. So break it down, little things. How can we begin, besides the smiling in the grocery store and the helping somebody, especially when it comes to, put aside our partners for a moment, but our colleagues at work, because there it gets very hard sometimes when the colleague says, you screwed up, you always screw up, can't you get this right? It's like, whoa, that wasn't very nice. That wasn't very kind. How do I respond to that in a way that will defuse what for me is now feeling like a very defensive situation?
So hopefully they give you more information than you just screwed up. But let's go with that. So one of the best ways to practice is to provide empathy. Reflect back what they said. So I screwed up doing whatever this was. And you seem really angry about that. And I can understand this is affecting what's going on for you. That is an act of kindness. And all you've done is reflect back what they've said, acknowledge the emotion they have, and given them empathy. I get if I had extra work to do now because of something I did, I would be upset too. Almost always, very, very frequently, when someone hears that back to a complaint, they relax. They relax because they don't have to defend their position. They've been understood. Now, you may have a point of view that says, well, I didn't really screw up. This is what I was trying to do. But you're never going to get that point across until the other person relaxes. So they've approached you thinking, I'm in a threatening situation. I have to tell you how you screwed up. So I'm going to do it in an angry way so that you'll back down. When you say I don't have to back down and I can stand my ground peacefully, they relax. And then you can have a conversation.
You're listening to Dr. Don Azevedo. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina.
Terry, the idea of practicing kindness and generosity, it sounds so simple, as we've said, but it does require a lot of work.
Well, it does require you to try and to be mindful and to pay attention. Yes, it does. And that's the idea behind practice, isn't it?
It is. And the other thing is it's so easy to get defensive when you're criticized. I remember a couple of years ago, a physician got quite upset because we were talking about cholesterol and statin-lowering drugs. And we had an interview with two different physicians who had different perspectives on the topic. And we were criticized for, having that other position. It was like everybody knows statins are the greatest. And, how dare you challenge that concept? And I got defensive.
Right. It was really difficult to approach the criticizer's point of view with empathy, wasn't it?
It was, but I tried to understand where they were coming from, and we did a show in which we had, both points of view as a follow-up, and I think we were even-handed. At least that was the goal, is to understand where they were coming from. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to find out about the number one issue that comes up in premarital counseling.
How do generous people fare in relationships compared to critical people?
Are there antidotes to contempt?
Setting clear boundaries and bringing up problems right in the moment can help. How do you practice that?
Can you discuss problematic behaviors with your partner without being hurtful?
What about values in relationships?
And can you honor another person's values, even if you don't share them?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast of The People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel utterly soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
To purchase a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1103. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com. You can also download the free podcast from iTunes. We invite you to consider writing a review.
Today on The People's Pharmacy, we're talking about relationships. How can we improve our interactions at home as well as at work so they're supportive rather than contentious?
Our guest is Dr. Don Azevedo. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina.
Dr. Azevedo, finances are the number 2 issue
that you touch on with couples who are in for premarital counseling. And premarital counseling sounds like such a great idea. So what's the number one issue?
The number one issue is how to live together. What habits are we going to engage in? How do we wash the laundry? How do we take care of all this other stuff? Because you come in, and this is actually true, more true now than it has been because people are getting married much later in life. So they've been adults, they've been off on their own outside of college, and they have their way of doing things. Each of them now is going to battle over how that thing is going to be done. And they don't think about that, we'll live together and it'll be just fine. So I just ask a few questions about, so how will you do the laundry? And how will you do this? And how will you do that? And sometimes the answer is all separate. And I said, so why are you getting married? Because there's this idea when you're married, there's some things that are joint. And how will you do that together? And that leads beautifully into finances.
Indeed it does, because then the question is, are you going to maintain separate accounts or are you going to have joint accounts? And, there are some situations in which it's appropriate to have a separate account, but you're right. Why would you get married if your entire life was going to be separate?
Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of solutions to this that work in marriages. So I'm not telling you that you have to have a joint pool for all of your dollars.
Yeah.
That might be the right answer for you.
Well,
but
for
it's not
some
me.
couples it is, and
Right.
for other couples it isn't.
Right. And there are couples who come in and say it should be 50-50, but he earns 2/3 of the income and she earns 1/3 of the income. That's the very common deal. 50-50 actually doesn't make sense there. Mm-hmm. So how do they talk about this? How do they think about it? How much do we take for vacations? How much do we take for savings? How much, what do we think about for retirement? Do we want to buy a house? All of those things. Some people, houses are status. This is one of the big fights. I want a 10,000 square foot house with all this. And the other person is saying, I don't need all of that. And that's actually daunting to me to think about how am I going to care for 2 acres and 10,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. And, that's a huge mortgage and all this other stuff. Helping them figure out a way to turn toward one another, to really think about each of those points of view and what's important to them is key.
Dr. Azevedo, there are some people who are sort of naturally supportive, smiling, friendly, happy, kind, generous. I mean, it just sort of happens for them. And there are other people who are critical, destructive sometimes, and just mean-spirited, I'm sorry to say. And that can happen in a relationship as well as at work or in almost any other situation. How do we help people move from that initial critical self, like you squeeze the toothpaste tube in the middle, you ruin it, or you don't wash the dishes right, to a more understanding and more collaborative and cooperative situation? Again, whether it's at work or whether it's at home. Because if there's an imbalance, if one of the people is always feeling like I'm the one who's doing all the heavy lifting, I'm the one who's being kind and generous, and he's always being critical and nasty and mean, boy, it sounds like they're going to end up in your office sooner than later.
My office or a lawyer's office?
Yeah, quite possibly the lawyer's office.
Quite possibly. So let's start with the generous person, right? Because that sounds like, that's the person I want to be. Yes and no. Mm-hmm. That person is wonderful if they're also setting limits, right? So I'm not getting reciprocity from you. I'm not really willing to do this anymore. So either we're in this together, and when I'm generous with you, you're generous with me, or I'll set a limit. That's healthy. Right? So you can begin generous, but you need to see, is there reciprocity in this relationship? On the other side, the cantankerous individual, right, one of my favorite kinds of people in the world, what are you trying to do? What's the outcome you're looking for? And often underneath that is, I'm really terrified you're going to reject me. So I'm going to reject you first.
Oh, that is an insight. That hadn't occurred to me. I have seen that happen, and it didn't occur to me that that was the motivation, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Because it's easy to go to the judgment. You're just mean. instead of what the heck is going on with you? Mm-hmm. Why this approach? Because I'm afraid you're not going to accept me. Mm-hmm. Now, that's hard to get to, because if I'm afraid you're not going to accept me, I am certainly not going to show you that vulnerability.
Well, and if you're going to be mean to me all the time, I'm probably not going to accept you.
Yes. So you fulfill that prophecy.
Yeah.
Can you share a story where you saw something of that nature happen in your office and how you helped resolve it?
So I did have a couple come see me, and this couple had met, and what they enjoyed about one another is their sense of humor. So they laughed a lot when they first dated, and they interacted with one another, and she found his humor just so witty and entertaining. Unfortunately, it was mostly sarcasm. Mm. And sarcasm always has a target, somebody who loses, and it is meant to be hurtful. So sarcasm is really meant to cut down other people and put them away. It was used in battle. You would make sarcastic poems about the other side. This is all way back when they had to get really close to one another to fight. And if your sarcasm was bad enough and you really, demeaned the king on the other side might leave instead of fight with you because you had more powerful magic. Right? So sarcasm, great at the beginning. It started to wear when the sarcasm would be turned on the spouse, when the spouse would do something that was threatening or not to the way the first partner wanted, and he would just be sarcastic. And then she would get upset, and he said, I was just joking. You liked my humor. Putting her in a double bind. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and then saying, you're too sensitive. And of course, she responded with kindness and generosity and said, you're right, it's just a joke. I don't have to take it personally. But that wears on you, and it's death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. So here's this person who's actually pretty terrified that no one's going to like them. So it starts with sarcasm, is the center of attention because people laugh, all the people who are not the target. And that's his coping mechanism for fitting in the world. Now starts turning it on the person that he loves the most, and she's now starting to back up. And she cannot set limits in a loving way because that's just really hard. He catches her in that double bind. She backs away. If she gets too strong, he moves away hurt, and she feels guilty because she's got more interpersonal draw for her. She's stuck, and hence they come into my office. So how do I intervene? That's the question. And with them, it was a whole lot of reflecting back and empathy. So, and looking for what was underneath. So right before you made the sarcastic comment, what is it you were thinking and feeling about yourself, about her, and about the situation? And that's a really good tool for the listeners. When you want to understand something about how you're behaving, stop and think about what were you thinking, what were you feeling about yourself, about the other person, and about the situation. And that will give you a whole lot of information about why you chose the next behavior.
That is really, I think, very, very helpful. I have one question.
Sure.
I think a lot of us are less aware of how we're behaving and less concerned about how we're behaving than about how that other guy is behaving. But you can only answer that question for your own behavior.
That is correct. That is correct.
So what do you do about that other guy?
So here's the deal. Control is an illusion. I can't control anyone else in the world. I can, however, influence them. That's really all I can ever do, is influence others. I can control myself. I can understand myself. I can make better choices for myself. And as I go through my life, I am the main character. There are no relationships I will ever have in which I am not present.
Right. Okay, so make yourself the hero of your story.
Make yourself the hero of your story. And that's how you'll affect change in your relationships everywhere, at work, at home, with your family of origin. Look at your own behavior. Stop and think. Take a deep breath and look at what you're thinking and feeling about yourself, about the other person, and about the situation. That little matrix gives you tons of information about your choices. So with empathy, I helped him calm down and find out that he was really afraid in those situations that however it was going wasn't his way. and that she was terrified, this was a really interesting bit, of not having him in her life. Mm-hmm. So she accommodated and accommodated and accommodated.
And that was why she was willing to put up with that sarcasm, even though it really hurt her feelings.
Absolutely.
How did they make out? What was the outcome?
So there are lots of definitions of make out there, Joe. How did the relationship go?
Yeah.
With the empathy, right? With him understanding the fear that she interpreted his sarcasm as he didn't want her, which is the exact opposite of what he was trying to accomplish, he was able to look at his own behavior because the threat level went down. With her seeing that she really needed to stand up to him so that he could recognize what was happening, because this was an ingrained habit. It came out of his mouth before he had really thought about it. She needed to stand up and say, whoa, that was sarcastic, and I don't like that. And he was more receptive. So instead of defending it, he would back up and say, you're right. What's happening for me is. And that was the call to self-reflection. And that's the part you were mentioning before. Most of us don't do that self-reflection. In a marriage, you have a great opportunity, if you will allow it, for your partner to give you the cue that says, now's the time.
Uh-huh. I would like to ask a little bit about contempt, because there is a suggestion in the article that we're discussing, and people will find a link to it on our website, that contempt is a factor that really tears couples apart. How can you avoid that, developing contempt? And I guess that kindness really is going to be the antidote to contempt, but are there other things we should be thinking about and doing?
Yes. So kindness is a help in this, but not the antidote. It'll only treat a symptom. The antidote is setting clear boundaries. So before contempt happens, behavior has occurred that you don't like. And the reason you develop contempt is either one of two. You've set boundaries. You've said clearly, this is not something that's acceptable to me, and the other person continues to do that. Or you've kept it to yourself and stewed on it and rehearsed how bad the other person is for doing this. Those will lead to contempt. So if you really want the solution, when someone does a behavior you don't like, bring that up to them.
How would you do that so you didn't hurt them and so you didn't make them defensive?
So the structure is similar to one I talked about a little earlier. I notice this behavior. I notice that when you go out on these sales trips, that you all tend to end up in a strip club. This is a very common deal, right? I really don't like that. I don't like the idea of objectifying women. I understand the needs for your business, and I would really prefer that you not go there. So I'm noticing the behavior. It's not acceptable to me. That's the effect that it has on me because these reasons, that objectifies women, this kind of stuff. And then here's what I would prefer. Don't go to those. If you have to go to a bar that doesn't have that. Okay? That's an uplifting way. I've noticed the behavior. I've shared with you. I've confided with you. You are still free to choose whatever you will do next. And that's the key thing. When you're confiding and you really want this to be a partnership, the other person has to be free to say, no, I can't do that. And here's why. Now, that might lead to a space of, if you prefer doing that to save your job and to keep all of this going on, and that's what you believe is going to happen, I may not be able to be married to you because that's how reprehensible this particular behavior is. Depends on how important it is. And how good the other person is in justifying that that's a necessary piece of their business.
Values are really important in relationships. So if I value education, if I value money, if I value hobbies, and you don't, we got trouble.
Yes.
How do we get people to appreciate the other person's values without contempt, without dismissing them, even if they don't share those values?
Well, number one, you have to articulate them. So often what gets us into trouble is we'll live our values, but we'll never say them. And so your partner is confused about why you're doing this. I've said to you 1,000 times that spending money on skiing is beyond our budget and is damaging to us, and yet you go on all these ski trips. And the person has a value for being outdoors, and in particular in alpine kinds of experiences, and that somehow feeds their soul in a way that I don't understand because I've never experienced that. They've never taken the time to explain that to me about why we need to budget actually for this instead of being resentful of it. So first you have to be aware of your values, then you have to convey them to the other person in a way that makes sense, and then people get to decide, yes, I'm with this or not with that value.
Dr. Don Azevedo, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It has been my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
You've been listening to Dr. Don Azevedo. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of Azevedo Family Psychology in Cary, North Carolina. Azevedo is spelled Azevedo. There's a link on our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarsky is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream, with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you would like to buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1103. That number again, 800-732-2334. You can also find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can share your thoughts on today's show. Are you concerned about your relationship with a spouse, a child, another family member, or a coworker? Could you change your behavior based on what you heard today? We'd love to hear from you.
At the website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. Listen at your own convenience or share it with a friend. And we'd certainly appreciate you rating our podcast at iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you subscribe.
And Terry, we have a link to the article that we were talking about on our website. Is that right?
That is correct.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks very much for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit BetterHelp.com/StopTheStigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.